on the music. It's kind of set the mood. It's a little bit of setting the mood, and then the music's off. I swear, no more music. It's just 2 seconds. Let me just get a little limonada con agua, limonada fresca con agua, no cerveza. So, where I left off last time, I'd like to pick up where I left off on the last time, and that would be Galatians 4. Galatians 4, I really wanted to, I've been pointing out, and this is something I didn't make, was a point on my last video. I was about to make it, and it's so many times throughout the Bible. You see it in Acts of the Apostles, that, everybody was saved the same way. They were saved, in the case of all these people, before they got the law, because the letters that Paul's writing to these people, although you can see here in Galatians 4:10, it says here, you observe holy days, months, and seasons, and years. You can see similar things in Colossians. You wouldn't think, and a lot of Hebrew Israelites will twist it that they were Israel of the Zerah, of the flesh, of the Sark, but what happened was, through losing their identity, they became lost tribes, lost identity, lost heritage, lost the promise, until Jesus and Paul, they relearned, and they were back under it. And now, but these same people, they want to twist Paul to say the problem with the Colossian heresy, the Galatians, the Thessalonians, all these churches, the people that were bringing them into this captivity, was into paganry and idolatry. And that's really twisting it. But to back it up, not even go the way they do. Let's not let them chop up the meaning. Let's just take a straight, real definition. What they were was, they was found as gents. They were saved as gents, and then somebody come along on the heels of what Paul set up, what the apostles set up. And like the sons of Sceva, they try to cast out devils in Jesus' name. But what the devils say, Jesus I know, Paul I heard of, but who are you guys? Because they didn't have the Spirit. They were messenger. Satan himself come as a messenger of light, and so they were preaching Jesus, but they wanted to boast in the circumcision. They wanted to bring them under the law, the captivity. And this is true through all these various books, that these were largely relatively Gentile churches, and somebody come along and try to bring them into Judaism, and Paul had to basically say, who has bewitched you? And in as much, and I'm not going to get into it at the moment, but I am done. I am straight up done. I'm not getting into controversy. I'm not getting into adversary. I'm not getting into any of it. I'm just going to go with what's true. And there's so much controversy involved in the risen Lord. I'll always defend the idea, but I'm not going to really get into the controversy of it all, because people that want to be right, they just argue to be right. Well, the other side argues to be right, and nobody really learns. Nobody's really growing. So a lot of what I'm saying isn't even edifying. I'm not necessarily telling you truths, and the truths I am telling you are the ones that are the least edifying, the ones where they break down your knowledge of God, your knowledge of Jesus, who is God. And that's not because I'm telling you things outside the book, per se, as much as it is telling you things about how it may not be as historical as you think, but Jesus said, blessed are those who have not seen. So it's not really about how true it can be in the realest sense of the word. It's about How true are the thematic elements? And if we go back to John 5, John 5 say that very truly I tell you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life. So if you believe Jesus, if you hear his word and believe the one that sent him, you have eternal life, and you'll not be judged, but has crossed over from death to life. So this isn't, they cross over from death to life upon believing. So very truly I tell you, a time is coming and has now come when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. Well, the dead don't hear, they're dead. And it's because of a metaphorical death. People were dead in their sin. People were dead in their rituals that weren't pleasing God. And so, for as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. So John, it says in John, that he has the power. Nobody took his life. He has the power to raise himself up from the dead, and this it shows how he's God. And it says, and he has given him authority to judge because he is the Son of Man. So, which Old Testament scripture is that from? Like Jesus being the Messiah, the judge, he has been given the authority, the promise, everything they had strived to attain, in Romans 9. And it's not that he hath cast away his people, but they are saved. Let's go there. Let's go to what comes right before talking about his people in Romans 9. We have Romans 8. And this picks up directly from where we left off, Galatians 4, not temporally, but in the structure. I don't read those parts of Galatians 4. If I may, real quick, just run through a couple brief things. I should have done it while I was there, but it says, he talks about the heir and the slave, and to redeem those who are under law, they might receive the adoption as sons, because you are sons. God has sent forth his spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying out, Abba, Father. Therefore, you're no longer a slave, but a son. So at this adoption, probably I would think along the lines where they believe his word, and he's been given crossover from death to life, where the dead hear. We see in John 5. Let's move it. But before I move from Galatians, I never made that point I was trying to prove before. So let me just go there real quick. Brethren, I urge you, become like me, for I become like you. And how was he like them? He was like them back before they had the law, when they just saw his struggle and saw he was right, even though they couldn't prove it, before they studied like Bereans and everything, before teachers came in, just from their own natural law in their hearts, their conscience, they said, Paul is right in this argument. These people are, like lording their status over him or something, and making him cower when he's got the spirit, and he was graceful enough to let them think they won in spirit, but that doesn't mean they actually won. It's not this realist might makes right, and this is the message Jesus was trying to tell them to begin with. And this is the message that's going to be missed by most people, because history is written by the winners. So we're not going to know what the loser said, but the losers are kind of the most fascinating part of it all, and that's why we have Hebrew roots movement, because it's based on this idea that if you Westerners didn't come mess this up, think about how great we would have been. Think about what potential we could have had, where we'd be with our Messiah or whatever, had you not come in and intervened with what we were doing. And that's a big component of Hebrew roots movement, that to get back to what formed in the time of Jesus, to reform the time of Jesus. And it doesn't need any reforming because Jesus was the reformation. We don't need to learn the same lesson again. That's why it's written for us to learn very succinctly, the New Testament relative to the Old, but the message is very much the same. But the hidden message was very much a mystery, but it was in there in a little parts, namely towards the end. When we get into, let me back up real quick to this James Atwell dude that I showed ya a time before. Shoot. I'm gonna act full up on this YouTube and didn't save where I started reading from last time. Okay, forget I said anything. But he talked about, the priestly source being later, and how they simply, even later than the priestly source, the priestly source where God made man and woman both. He made them in his image. He said it was good. A lot of things from Genesis 1. So, a lot of the Bible is like this, where you're not going to be able to see things if you read them in order, because Genesis 1 is actually a newer text than the rest of Genesis, by and large. Maybe not Genesis 14, Genesis 38 or something, but nonetheless, it's a later source, and even later than that, you seem to have even greater truths written, namely in the wisdom books, and these ketubim, these books, like, I'm not saying Ezra, that's more of like a historical book, and even though it may be rather late, maybe the priestly time, they're around Haggai and Zechariah and all them, but something came around even later, and it's going to be much confusing to people because it's attributed to the time of Solomon, and they'll say Job is the oldest book in the Bible. It's so old. Namely because there's somebody who, maybe more reminiscent of Balaam, who has some integrity outside the law. And after all the scorn we see against Esau and everything, we would think that, that there couldn't be anything good there. They don't keep the Sabbath or something terrible, and therefore God hates them, even though they share the same seed and whatnot. But in these books, like Ecclesiastes, it's not the lessons. I mean, it's not the lessons of Jesus either. He says eat, drink, and be merry, practically, but it's not the lessons of the Old Testament, like in terms of the Torah and stuff like that, and the righteousness of the law. It's about almost like the pointlessness of righteousness, almost, and because of that, what makes people of the nation different than other nations is somewhat irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, in terms of Ecclesiastes. And Job, how somebody could be righteous and yet still suffer, and the test that God put them through. But there's a didactic point in the test. There's something good on the other side. And this is very reminiscent of the whole Egyptian experience. And I would say the numbers in Deuteronomy are largely from a later date. And so a lot of the lessons of the kings and everything are embedded into, the Deuteronomical narrative. And that doesn't mean you're not going to find anything about it before Numbers. I mean, they probably put little tidbits into Leviticus, and probably large portions, because quite honestly, probably none of it was written up to then. But there were traditions going back really far. And out of all people who would keep the traditions would be people you would call Esau and Ishmael and like, because these people were the most insular. And um, if you look at some people from Saudi Arabia, they have very early, kind of hazel eyes, where uh, there's a I would beg, people from beyond the ice melts and the glaciers and mountains and stuff to the far north to have these blue eyes, or genes to originate blue eyes. And they have a huge concentration here there in Saudi Arabia of the J haplogroup, and which we see being predominant throughout most of the Indo-European countries. And so it's not necessarily as the Bible will tell you, because the Bible wanted to place them on the outside and call them not civilized, when relative to the Babylonians and the Tower of Babel and the Sumerians and all them was the opposite. They were the more one venturesome, off the beaten path. But really, it's a sneak diss. If you really think about it, they're really talking about a diss on men, brutishness of men, Nimrods, and hairy beasts that act like beasts by hunting. And where Jacob, being more refined, uh, has something that Adam had. So if Adam's the first man, what happened to the Paleolithics? Where did they go? Well, that's because they don't start at the beginning. They start at the advent of something. And what is this something? Is probably about 7,000 years ago or something, like they say. And that something is Sumerian civilization in Elam or or somewhere thereabouts. And whether those were the first groups to cross over the mountains or whatever, but that's probably why there's such a strong racialism amongst Hebrew Israelites, because there's a strong racialism embedded into the whole Genesis narrative, the favoring of the second and not the first, of this replacement theology, where the original people were basically the serpent seed, and how it needed to be cleansed. And this is the Israelitish narrative, but the Israelitish narrative is not the Jewish narrative. The Jewish narrative, since the time of Ezra, has expropriated the Israelitish narrative, and we don't know of an Israelitish narrative other than them, because the Samaritans and a lot of the other ways of looking at it have been minimalized, and this revisionist history has uh, overemphasized the Hebrew roots. And really, what was happening was a, a strong leaning towards Persian. And that was because it was on the foothills of the Persians, where the Greeks had come in like a running ram and went um, ramrod and rickshawed all the way through Asia Minor, to the subcontinent, and even controlled Pakistan and stuff. And this, within no time, became known as the Seleucid Empire. And when we get into the biblical time period, you would think it didn't even exist, because it all happened during the missing 400 years. But the Bible that didn't have any activity in those 400 years, the Tanakh rather, was basically all compiled in those 400 years. But it's a technicality because they can't have you think that the Greeks brought any of the wisdom, writing, or any of the sort. And don't even look at similarities between Proverbs and Greek wisdom because the Greeks must have copied it, or it's a coincidence because they couldn't have in any way got, because they got it from the Most High God, and the Greeks, they must have got it from the devil or something, right? And so where was I? In Galatians. This hasn't always been the case. There used to be a big, like the case of Ezra. That's not how everybody looks at it. Yes, that is a sort of Jewish way of looking at it, but that doesn't mean that God wrote the book of Ezra. God may not have wrote the book of Ezra. You always say the word of God, the word of God. And if God did write the book of Ezra, then it may not be as you think it is. It may be like kind of like the book of Job, where you're supposed to see how it was all just some test, of a false leader. For instance, let me go to First Kings 22:22. 1 Kings 22:22 say, the Lord said to him, in what way? In what way? So he said, I will go out and be a lying spirit in their mouth of all his prophets. So I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And the Lord said, you shall persuade him and also prevail, and go and so do. And we see the same thing in the book of Job, and Ezekiel 25:20, I think it is, where he say, I will give them laws that aren't good. And we see the same thing in the New Testament, that it was part of God's plan the whole time for Judas to betray Jesus. That that Satan went into Judas when he put his hand in the same dish as Jesus. Well, Jesus told him to go and do what he's going to do. And so the ones that put their hands in the same bowl, it says they zealously court you, but for no good. Yes, they want you to exclude you, and that's what Ezra wants to do. Ezra wants to exclude you, that you may be zealous for them. And this was true for even the Second Temple. Like they had this outer court, and it's built on all these different hills. It's not really, you don't think of it as a temple like we do, where they built roofs. Like they would build maybe some brass pillars, and the rest would be concrete. Then they'd have some like wooden A-frames or something, maybe made of the cedars of Lebanon, with some canopy, like some cloth over it. And, they probably had some nice carvings on the inside of, all the elements like the water and what have you. And, but the God-fearers would go, they wouldn't be able to get as close as some of those that were, of the 12, they could get right up closer to the high priest. But I'm going to get into this with Alexander Jannaeus. As people started to be against him, he made himself further away from the people. He put up these barricades, these wooden barricades that even his people couldn't get close to him, because he's so afraid of conducting service as the high priest king. That somebody could take his life or something, that he feared him, and he could even conduct service in a very spiritual kind of way, and for whatever reason, uh, the gents couldn't really get inside the inner court, where the other guys could get, and it was called the wall of partition, which we see in Ephesians 2, I think verses let's say 12 through 14 or somewhere around there, and the middle wall of partition. Remember, Paul said there's no Judeans, there are no Hellenes. There's just one. And there's no slave or free man. And so this middle wall of partition come down, and everyone's brought near. There isn't this exclusion that they want to exclude you. It says here in Galatians 4:17. You know. So as I was trying to get to Romans 8, and I feel this is where I think I've even tried to make this argument rhetorically that Christ died only for Israel, but that's not true. I mean, that's what Romans is really about, like Romans 3 and all that. Romans 5, it says death reigned from Adam to Moses, so there was death before for Adam, and this is going to come into play, especially when I get into Jeremiah 25 and the judgment on the nations, and of course Jeremiah 51 and they're around. But that's going to be very much important in terms of the crucifixion of Christ Jesus. But you have this lying spirit that was given by Most High God, or by Satan, by the authority of Most High God, or whatever. The same that did in Jesus, an innocent man who's given over to the high priest, and put to death. And so somebody righteous, is not going to be necessarily by the law, because the law is the same law that has put many innocent people to death, claims to be from God, perfect or whatever, and the only person who in all history who was righteous before the law happens to be killed too by so it is what it is, right? So this is Roman 8, is that the righteous requirement of law might be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. And that Spirit is real important. And no, it doesn't mean that Jesus wasn't flesh, Jesus being man is very much important to the argument I'm making right now. So please stay tuned, because that's going to be it's not, I'm not making some sort of Marcionist, Sablinist kind of God is divine kind of argument. So it says and if Christ is in you, the body is dead because of sin, but the Spirit is life because of righteousness. So this resurrection doesn't necessarily have to be some, when the graves get up and all the spooky zombies get put together again and all covered in the sinews, then there's going to be a 1,000-year reign, and then the that's heaven, but then there's going to be the war of Gog and Magog, and then Satan's going to be destroyed, and then that's the end, but that's on earth, and only the righteous will survive, but yet there's going to be dogs all around the outside, so you can't even leave the city because of all the dogs and something like that. Now in Romans 8, it says, therefore, brethren, we are debtors not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh, for you live according to the flesh, you will die. Remember John I think it was John, maybe Matthew, where Jesus told Peter, put away thy sword, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Now that is where God had chose the latter regarding the one who was on the heel of the former, and the former, more like Nimrod, you know, couldn't really. They thought it was too feminine to grow lentils and sort them and mourn for his father and all these things. You know, he's too busy doing him and everything, and that kind of savagery may or may not have been a big part of the successfulness of certain groups of people, but probably more so the successfulness of certain groups of people had to do with pottery and metallurgy and things like that. But that metallurgy also helped them, and then the farming helped them do accounting, which led to writing and various other things. And this they may have had something of the sort of a Sabbath, but to think it was Judaism is incredibly far fetched. They have expropriated all of a large part of history and given it to their own self, and made a didactic teaching out of it. And we miss a lot of teaching, the universalism of Genesis 1, Ecclesiastes, Job, and I'm forgetting another wisdom book that doesn't seem to have any focus on Israel specifically, because everybody knows that, all have sinned, right? Not just Israel. And this is going to be proven in Jeremiah 25, but is also in Romans 3 and various other places. And if I could just move up, so it says, "For as many as led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God." The sons, remember that's what Jesus was always called by people, the Son of God. I think Peter called him that you're the Son of the Most High God or something, maybe. I don't remember. But when you cry out Abba, Father, that's like basically saying in Aramaic, Father. So that's what Jesus would do, right? Because God was his father or something. But but he's talking about all of us. All of us can cry out Abba, Father. So if I may, so he says, "For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself will also be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pains together until now. Not only that, but we will also have the first fruits of the Spirit. Even we ourselves groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of the body. For we are saved in this hope. But the hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one still hope for what he sees? For what he sees. What does one still hope for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance." So, if I may just fast forward up to Romans 11:4 and 5, it says, "But what does the divine response say? I reserved for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. Even so, at this present moment, there is a remnant according to the election by grace. And if by grace, then it is by no longer work." So just as gents are sinners outside of the law, Judeans are saved outside of the law. So the law has really nothing to do with it. And this is pointed out by Paul, who uses Abraham as an example, how all the nations of the earth were blessed by this person who, by faith, walked with God and everything. And that was a lesson that you just couldn't get around. But there's a lot of history in truth in that, in even what I was saying, that certain people have expropriated a long list of things that have happened throughout the course of history, and all people can get those lessons and get those promises of being saved and everything, just by the grace of God, because the sun shines on the just and the unjust both, So there were tares planted amongst the wheat and everything. So people are saved, regardless of being good or bad. And that's true and has been true. And the ones who were successful and won wars, there's no reason to think that they were the ones who were right, but people want to kind of add that little bit. Maybe they had a little more gusto, or they had more people, and therefore that implies some, righteousness, but it don't, and it shouldn't. So if I go to Luke 23, it's he's being led to hit the cross. I mean, this is beyond the 11th hour. I mean, this is right before he gets nailed up, and says, he's talking. I think he just turned to the crowd like, can you even believe it? Like, after, he's covered in his own blood, and he's just been marched in the most grueling kind of way, up with his own cross, and he did so without making any sound, not worrying about himself whatsoever. And here I mean, Luke 23 just gets to me. I don't know if I've seen a movie or something, but just the vision of the malefactors with him is just, it's too much. I just imagine if I was there, it just becomes too real. And even though it's not real, meaning I wasn't there, there's no real memory I have of it. And it's not because they crucified my Lord. It's because how evil people can become, like how much we've hurt each other over these years, how barbaric we were over these years. Somebody who hadn't done anything wrong. And then how people are, the audacity of this one next to him, mocking him. He too is gonna die. And he still is sitting there. What kind of petty, like, what reward are you gonna get to just do that doggy dog madness one last time? What would provoke somebody to be that wicked, to say, why don't you save yourself if you're... What a petty little thing to say. And but he just turns to them, and says, he said unto them, daughters of Jerusalem. So these women were lamenting and bewailing. He had picked up, especially in the Gospel of Luke, all sorts of women, and he didn't run through them. He, blessed them as much as he could, giving them all he could, and not taking. And he had all these women who had fancied him as a teacher and everything. And they were bewailing and lamenting, and it's probably a ghastly of a sight. The guys didn't want to see it; they chickened out. And he was abandoned by all the people who were supposed to care about him. And even the night before he was betrayed, he told him he just needed to go talk to his father. Man, they can't even stay awake. They don't want anything to do with learning, showing love and support, or anything, And so he turns to them and he says, for behold, the days are coming. He said, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. And no, he's not talking about, 2,000 years later, they're going to restore Israel, but then the Antichrist is going to come, but he's going to be Roman, and yeah, he's going to be the Pope, and then they're going to redo the whole Messiah thing and get it right this time, and then they're all going to believe in all this other end times madness. From Tommy Ice and the rest, Dr. Tommy Ice and the rest, right? Uh, so it says, "For behold, the days are coming in which they shall say, Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bear. Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bear, and the paps which never gave suck." And this is so different than the Old Testament. I am not going to do it. Like this video is entitled, I'm giving it up. I'm not going to belabor any of my old plans. And this is kind of sad in a way. Like when you leave a relationship, there is a sadness of all the things that could have been, would have been, that you're losing, that you're forsaking. But I'm giving it up. I was going to walk through Acts to show you who the enemies of the apostles were. I was going to go through Romans to show you how people are saved, by faith, and go through it all, but I can't, I'm not into the controversy. I just come off as anti-Semitic or something, even though I'm just telling you how the Bible explains it, even though a philo-Semitic wave has taken over, the whole church, especially in the South, that you got what I'm saying all kinds around. I'm trying to tell you what the Bible say, but a lot of people wouldn't know what the Bible say because they had got it twisted. They want to revise all history and to where it don't even make sense anymore. And nobody's telling you straight up anymore because everyone's afraid. You can't talk about them or anything. And I'm just trying to tell you what the message of the Bible is. But Jesus spoke in parables. It was written before the destruction of the temple, that you can't talk against the temple. And what more so is, the Bible was carefully curated, the New Testament, to not cancel the old, to not rewrite the old, but to use it against itself. When you can use someone else's argument against them, you win in the argument frame. You've outsmarted them, that you just use their own words to prove your point. But you don't see it. You would think that Jesus's whole mission was just some big failure, and because you believe in materialism as success, you don't believe in the tribulation, the refining, and the purification. And if you do believe in those things, then you're not seeing how these things were happening a long time ago. Like they happened in the times of Jeremiah. What Jesus is pointing to in Jeremiah 25 has happened. This was before the 70 years. Ezekiel during the 70 years, Daniel after the 70 years, and after the 70 years they go back, and this is when you have Zechariah and all of them. But the timeline would get all messed up. So there's this second generation, and when they expropriated the name of Israel, they didn't do justice to what happened to them, because they would say it was God doing it. That's what Samuel and and kings and all that is about. There was a temple in Shiloh, but all these men of God, messengers from God, came, and it slowly shifted away from there in Shiloh in Israel down to the dirty south in Judah where nobody can see him. So how'd that happen? Well, it was a thing God did through his word. That's what Samuel's all about. Samuel wasn't descended, it's through a Nazarite loophole, a Nazarite exception. And David wasn't, they weren't supposed to have a king. The Moshiach was not a big part of the Torah or any part of the Torah, hardly. It was about the priesthood and what have you. So God had done a thing. And that's similarly the lesson in Deuteronomy, that there was a generation before the 40 years, circumcised, told to follow the law. They didn't. They perished. It was all a big test, about a big temptation. They failed. The next generation was not circumcised, saved by grace. They didn't have the ephod and the Uma Thurman or whatever, those where the calf slots and all this other stuff. They simply inherited land. The people who didn't have the original promise, that weren't that went through the purification, they get the land, and this all happened. But we see something else come along, and that's what I'm getting into is the false prophets and everything of the Second Temple period. The First Temple period is oblique. I mean, it's so very obscure because of how antiquated it is. We can't find it to any of it to really be provable. And the parts that are provable don't point to the history they're telling to, that the one nation, under God, indivisible. It points to a much broader, much more universal history, not nearly as exceptional and exclusive. So I wanted to fast forward up to Isaiah 50. Or first, let me hit Jeremiah 25. And Jeremiah 25 say, and the word of Jeremiah concerning the people of Judah. So these are the people of Judah. And the people of Judah, he had told them in Jeremiah 7, he never wanted them to sacrifice their children. Where they got that idea. Supposedly they were carrying the tabernacle of Moloch in the desert, their king, in the Star of Rimfan. And somehow they got the idea that this was what he wanted, and that's clear. The Valley of Canaan. I mean, this is part of the history. Jeremiah 25:7. Yet ye have not hearkened unto me, saith the Lord, that ye might provoke me to anger with the works of your hands, to your own hurt. Your works, your hands, your hurt. Therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, because ye have not heard my words. Behold, I will send and take all the families of the north. All the families of the north. I think this has a lot to do with Genesis 12 and 13, all families being blessed, as well as Romans 11:25, principally, where maybe 26 or something, where he say, until the fullness of the gents come in. And Jesus said it not too long before this. He had a little Mount Olive thing right before coming to Jerusalem, and he's saying the same thing. He's looking at Jerusalem. He's giving it the woes or whatever. Woe to you, Jerusalem. Woe to Jerusalem. And he about to get on his donkey ride in, but he say the fullness of the Gentiles is going to be trampled upon by all the nations. All the nations are going to come up in it. All of them. And so, when the full number of nations come into Jerusalem, this is going to make Israel more jealous and more jealous and more jealous, because they wanted to keep them out, and that's bothered them. It was like a zero-sum game. Well, if somebody else can get what I can get, that's not so special. And they want to be real special. And so when the full number of nations come into God's dwelling or whatever it was supposed to be, supposedly, then this is going to maximize their jealousy, so that when 70 AD comes, when it's destroyed, they will have had the most chance, the most reason of not being favored, of being jealous, to be compelled to join in on what the nations are doing in coming closer to the Lord. And it might not be as shrewd as they liked it to be, or honor them as much as they like to be, but nonetheless, that wasn't the point. Just as he had made all the other nations jealous through favoring his nation, that brought them to the Lord, he would turn right around and use that same tactic on his own ex-wife to try to get her to repent, and so when the fullness of time come in, the fullness of the nations and the city, that would culminate in 70 AD, when all the armies came in and surrounded him, hemmed them in from every angle. And then you would know that the end is near. The end being when they destroyed the whole temple and Levitical system. They had a whole economy there of the gents would come up to the money changers, and they'd get their little turtle doves, and then they would get as close as they could get. Then they'd probably have some Gibeonite, come down and grab the pigeons and bring them up. I don't know if you were supposed to have the mother spend 8 days or however many days in some place until her cleanliness was over or something, and whatever they did, they was following the laws of Moshe or whatever. So it says, "Behold, I will take the families of the north, saith the Lord, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land and against the inhabitants thereof and against all these nations round about, and will utterly destroy them." So this gets into what I was saying about all these nations round about. This gets into what I was saying, not about all the nations that come like from the north. These nations are basically other Hebrews, and the Hebrews aren't necessarily descendants of Abraham, or like that's the thing about Tigers, is if there's only one Hebrew, he's not much of a Hebrew. If it's just him and Lot and Sarah, I don't know that they had a whole national name. But nonetheless, there were all kinds of Semitic people in and around there, and Semitic like people, in and around there at this time period. And so these are these nations that the Lord will utterly destroy, as well as this land. This land being, it's very clear, which he say. He spoke to the people of Judah, it says here in verse 2, verse 1, also, and he's saying he's going to his servants, but it's going to become more clear as we read on. But it says, I will take from them the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness and the voice of the bridegroom. He's going to take the voice of the bride and the sound of the millstones and the light of the candle. He's going to take all those things, and the whole land shall be desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Oh, but Daniel was talking about a big gap, and Jesus was talking about a big gap, and none of this happened, and none of this means what it says, and God would never do that, cast away his people and all this. And I will bring upon that land all my words which I have pronounced against it, even as written in this book, which Jeremiah hath prophesied against all the nations. So everyone's guilty, everybody sins, not just Israel, regardless of anything I've ever said. For thus saith the Lord God of Israel unto me, take the wine cup of this fury at my hand, and cause all the nations to whom I send thee to drink it. Remember, Jesus wanted to pass from his hands, though. But Jesus is Israel. Israel is the suffering servant, and Jesus is the suffering servant. So he said, let this cup pass from me. Well, Israel's going to drink from the cup, because Joel is about judgment of his own nation. That's also what all the other prophets were really hinting at, that judgment starts his own house. What was that verse that people always quote at the beginning of an Amos 3 or whatever, Amos 3:2, only his house has he known, so that's why he's going to start with his own house. And that this is true here as well, because we know like Edom was further south, so they probably got conquered later. So King Obadiah of Edomia, may have laughed at first, but realized that was not very nice, and he repented and wrote the book of Obadiah, put a little Yah at the end of it, and the rest is history. And that, I think the Jewish Encyclopedia said the same thing. The Talmud said the same thing, that Obadiah was originally from Edomia. Remember Obed-Edom, Obadiah. But yeah, you got Tyre and Zidon, you got Dedan. Tyre, Zidon are Lebanon. Dedan and Timon are Edomia, Buz, Edomia, the kings of Arabia. They call them the mingled people. And mingled people, like mingled linens, is Arab, like mingled day and night, Arab, they say in Yiddish. But, the mingled people are Arabians, and the kings of Zimri and the kings of Elam, the kings of Medes. These are all people along, that Syrian desert and into there, and these are all going to be. But I bet you, Elam was already conquered by then. I mean, this isn't going to be an exact history. It's trying to prove a point. It's didactic history. And says, therefore, saying unto him, thus say the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, drink ye and be drunken, and spew and fall, and rise no more, because of the sword which I will send against you. And it shall be, if they refuse to take the cup of at thine hand to drink, then they shall say unto him, thus say the Lord of hosts, y'all shall certainly drink. So Jesus said, don't let this cup pass from me. Well, this was happened to Israel. What happened to these nations where they weren't even allowed not to drink? They had no choice. They got to drink. They're stumbling and they're gonna fall. And for lo, I began to bring evil on the city which is called by my name. I began to bring evil. I began to bring evil on the city which is called by my name. I began to bring evil on the city which is called by my name. And should you be punished? You shall not be punished. For I will call, you shall not be unpunished, rather. You shall not be unpunished. For I will call a sword upon the inhabitants of the earth, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore prophesy thou against them all these words, and saying to them, Thou shalt hear the roaring on high, and utter his voice from his holy habitation. He shall mightily roar upon his habitation. He shall give a shout as they tread the grapes against all the inhabitants of the earth, which will come from the heavens. Or sorry, even to the ends of the earth, rather. So how, ye shepherds? All the shepherds will have nowhere to flee. All these leaders of Israel, they're going to have to go down with the ship if they want, because it's all going to be gone. And the Hebrew roots is trying to tell you, well, let's just back up to then. If you would just let us focus, if we could just focus on what we were doing without getting your little hook nose into it, you Romans, then we would have, if you wouldn't have been so meddlesome, you know, we would have had space cars already. Everybody have their own space car, But you send us back into the dark ages. Christianity's, just been a big darkness on the earth, right? And that's at the heart of the Hebrew roots movement, is that, but that's a mistake I make, is, oh, just let me focus on what I was doing. If only this didn't happen, if only that didn't happen, let me just figure out what I was doing. What was it doing? You ask a young kid what they want to do, it's high anxiety, because I mean, even a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, people don't know what they're going to do with their lives, what they want to do. That's very that's a lot of pressure and everything, to have all the answers and to have a destination and everything. People just exist, and um, for that reason, it's not a matter of getting back to your true self. It's not so much that we just embody some divine spark, and if we can just shut off all the fakeness and get to our inside, what we were originally, then we'd have these ideas or conceive things or something, when really, conceptions of ideas come from already known and established things. And that's why I'm getting out of controversy and into, instead of teaching Bible to adults, I'm going to be teaching math to children. I want to stay with something that's true, because knowledge, fear of the Lord is the beginning of all knowledge. And I believe, that, they're doing a lot with math, and a lot of it's fake. And we're going to prove what's fake and what's real. And I'm taking everybody with me. I'm not going to try to make $1 million so I can lord over others. I want this information to go out, and I'm just going to stick to what's true. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to have anybody say that I have some spin I'm trying to, put on it. It's just all love. I don't do this for me. I probably look bad. I'm out here looking like a fool when I could be doing something better, and so I didn't think it would be appreciated. I'm not trying to get appreciation, but I just don't want to get caught up in trying to figure out what idea I have, and you know stop the world from spinning just to figure out what happened 2,000 years ago. I mean, what happened 2,000 years ago is already written down. If everybody wants to go read it, be my guest or whatever. Everybody, they broke it down word by word and defined every word and have concordance and everything else, and you can, figure it all out. But I'm telling you, they lying, and a lot of people have been lying for a long time. So a lot of what there is to figure out is not even clear, because for every truth there's about 15 lies. So it's just a matter of trying to kind of read it for yourself, unlearn all the lies that they tell you about the end days and everything else. getting into the real nitty gritty. But I just want to point out there's Isaiah 51:16. Isaiah 51:16. But before I do that, yeah, I'm getting into teaching math, and it's going to be textbook kind of stuff. Math isn't just some structured thing that you can't write a book about. People write all kind of books, and you go to math class, you're going to go to PhD in math class. Best believe if there's a textbook, probably there is, and that somebody be teaching by the book. They professor going chapter by chapter, maybe not, PhD, but or some classes, but yeah, every day we write the book, and that's what they was trying to tell you. They was saying we got the prophets, God, we were made in God's image. God is speaking through us, and God is with us, and you know, what if God was one of us, and but it's the opposite of the Greeks were saying. They're saying we're like God, where the Greeks are saying God is like us, and where Christianity is a little bit in between. Jesus was God and man, and there's different kinds of flesh. There's man, and then there's animals, and but there's not like different kinds of flesh as in Jewish and Greek. They're one of the two flesh, and they're two of the same flesh, and the problem with racism is that people just exist. You can say I never want to have a so and so in my family, and all of a sudden your daughter's pregnant by a so and you have that so and so in your family, and he's part of you. Or you may find out, you go back in history, your dad wasn't your dad; it was somebody else, and it was the people you hate, or something like that. So, and this is very much true. I mean, you look at the book of Ezra; they was all mixed up, and so you wouldn't believe that thousands of years of not knowing the history, not following the law, and without the lost tribes, that there's some clear demarcation of the true seed, or that God would even care about anything of the sort. Is kind of insane, and but that's very, very popular today because they want to create this in-group and out-group. That's what the Zionist state is all about. They want to build up walls and keep people out and try to make rules that you can't even join. Even if you want to join, you have to want to join and be of some ancestry that they determine is what it is, because it's supposed to be something for the end times, and they got all the Christians duped to go along with it. And this duplicity that there is blank and blank, there are Judeans and Hellenes, when Paul clearly said there isn't. Paul never said nothing about no messianic Judeans or anything like. He called himself a Christian, and they running around doing the most, leading all kinds of people that they want to exclude you and have you boast in them and everything. And people love it because they believe in this whole racialist theory of God's chosen people, the divine spark, all this Chabad Lubavitch doctrine from the Kabbalah and everything, and the Talmud, and it's not even biblical, but they let Talmudic rabbis, be the leaders of them because they falsely believe that those people would better know the Old Testament than a Christian, which isn't necessarily true. I mean, maybe a rabbi knows better than a lay Christian, but with all the dishonesty you might find, is it even worth listening to? But it doesn't mean every person of that faith knows the Bible better than people of your faith. Why would you ever think that? Or that they are smarter or more intelligent or any other racial trope? So, I wanted to read a little bit from First Maccabees, chapter 14, verse 41. It say, but the Judeans and the priests have resolved that Simon, this is Simon Teus, he was the son of Matthias or Mattiyahu Maccabeus, who was like the first recognizable Maccabean. He wasn't from an Aaronic line, so if you try to trace his ancestry back too far, you're probably not going anywhere. But nonetheless, he became a big leader, and his sons especially became big leaders. The first great one, I think, was Judas, and the second one maybe Jonathan, and the third would be this guy, Simon, who's the youngest. I think his older brothers passed away untimely or something, as was the way of these kings and stuff. But um, he would the Judeans and priests had resolved that Simon should be the leader and high priest forever, but they won't say he's king, because you read down here and there's this dude who's a Seleucid king, as I was saying, who ends up being a king, and but you go to Wikipedia and all the revisionists have written way too much and said way too friggin' much about all kinds of untrue things, and they'll try to feign this independence. Well, he wasn't quite Seleucid enough, and then under the Ptolemies, he wasn't Potomac enough, and Cleopatra didn't quite have him. And here he is meeting with these people, paying these people money, and paying this. And really, they gotta jump through hoops and do backflips and twist their head around to try to make sense of this idea of this independent commonwealth, much like they do with David and Solomon, where you try to think of some great nation that existed throughout large swaths of antiquity, and yet you're not really finding any kind of unified, long-standing independent country, especially when you go through secular history. And very much the same. You're not really finding what the big deal is, why they would think that that there was some really important will of God going on here in the victories militaristically, because this came at the foothills of the defeat of large parts of the Seleucids to the Parthians. As the Parthians were growing, these Judeans were allied with the Parthians. The Seleucids were too Greek. So even though the Greeks were controlling the Asia Minor for hundreds of years, eventually they would get sick of it. And a leader who had both, who was related or descended from the Seleucid king, but maybe was a second born son, and didn't get his. I wanted to be king, but my blood became king. So he went off and found some Parthian, princess, and was able to get enough people, on his side. And that's how this Game of Thrones works. There's nothing good to be learned out of it. It's all so bad, but it's history, and I don't even know how to explain this to you all, but when you read Maccabees, they try to kind of go with the motifs of conquering Jericho or conquering Jerusalem, as David did against the Jebusites, and they're doing all these things, and they rewrite it here in First Maccabees 14. They're just like they're really saying a lot, like you gathered the people when the enemies decided to invade their country to lay their hands on their sacred. And Simon rose up and fought for his nation. He spent great sums on his own money. He armed the soldiers in his nation and paid them wages. He fortified the towns of Judea and Bezer in the borders of Judea, where formerly the arms of the enemy had been stored. And he placed up the garrisons of the Judeans, and he also fortified Joppa and the seas of Gazara, in which he were born on the borders of Azotus, where the enemy had formerly lived. He settled Judeans there and provided for those towns whatever was necessary for their restoration. The people saw Simon's faithfulness and the glory that he had resolved to win for his nation, and they made him the leader and the high priest because of all the things he'd done. of the justice and loyalty he had made toward his nation. He sought in his every way to exalt his people. In his days, things prospered in his hands, so that the Gentiles were put out of the country. Reminds me more of the Ezra. They're building up walls and they're getting into the law and they're kicking out the Gentiles and but really, it says like, as were also those in the city of David in Jerusalem who had built themselves a citadel from. So it's all, yeah, he honored David. He honored David. When really you go read the history, and he'd have to plunder David's sanctuary to get enough gold to pay the suzerain, the whatever it's called, what vassals pay. Vassals pay, the amounts to the king to provide services or whatever. And to pay this, he had to he had to loot from David's tomb or whatever. He probably felt that was his role as Hamashiach, the high priest, Kohen Gadol. I might be thinking of John Hyrcanus, but Hyrcanus is actually part of Partheon, so that really reinforces my theory there. But I wanted to go quickly beyond Simon Dassey and go to, I think, his son. Yes, this is his son who married his brother's wife, Salome, Queen Salome, who they say was the sister of a famous Pharisaical rabbi, a proto-rabbi. Hillel wasn't a rabbi. This guy wasn't a rabbi. There weren't, Pharisaical rabbis back then. But after they had solicited the help of the Parthians to beat the Seleucid Empire, they, much like it was kind of like a Trojan horse, where how the Athenians and the Trojans were at war with each other, and the one had solicited help from Xerxes or something like the movie 300 or whatever. But this is about 400 years later when they were having problems with Seleucids, and they would become allied with Cleopatra's, and the Cleopatra's had, at this time it was like Ptolemy the Ninth or something, and she had like kicked Cleopatra the Third had kicked out her son Ptolemy the Ninth, and he had set up in like Cyprus or something, and he was invading the Levant to set up his kingdom further, to reposition himself in Egypt. And this may be why the next Cleopatra, her daughter, solicited help from Rome. But the Israelite king, or whatever you call him, the Hasmonean king, was very weak. He was courting all these different kings and queens, namely Cleopatra. She was probably his favorite. And but the Egyptian Cleopatra's another Ptolemy. This is where we get the Old Testament from, because they wrote the Septuagint. So Seleucid's bad guys. At this time, it probably became Iranian Seleucids were the bad guys, and Parthians were the good guys, even though there was probably admixture in both camps. It was probably along more political lines. Not that the Greeks' representation linguistically and with suzerainty ever implied some racial composition, but nonetheless, as different people were mixing and moving, and there's not going to be hard lines to make it very easy, like the Book of Maccabees, where the bad priest was named Jason and the good priest was Onias. When you read, Onias is just a Hebrew variant of Jason, and they were brothers, and seems a little too far flung. But anyway, I'm just going to read a little bit about Alexander Jannaeus, and this is why I'm done, is because a lot of people won't see what I'm trying to say, and I'm just gonna say it. The more I say it, the weird it's gonna sound. If this becomes what the hill I die in, I think it's a noble hill, but it's not an edifying one. People's belief is already fragile enough. They need Jesus to be real, and Jesus is real because these are real things that happen to real people, but it doesn't need to be in actual history. Like, you can't reconcile all of the different gospel narratives. If it's the word of God, then how do you do that to have inaccuracies and things like that? And so if you need it to be true on a superficial level, it's all just going to seem like parable, and it's all going to be mysterious. But it begins to unfold when you realize that something's being suggested. So we can't just you know say, oh, if we just turn back to the way we were and just remember, then God will remember, then we'll restore the promises. No, that's not the narrative. The narrative was the promises were given, and then the world kept turning. I've wanted as much as anyone for the world to stop turning and just let me catch up, let me rest, let me do what I'm doing. But that's not what the world does. The world just keeps spinning and spinning, and it doesn't stop for anybody. And this is kind of like what is said in Romans 9. What for Paul? Why is he kicked against the goads? You're supposed to be a good little sheep and just move to where the herd is moving. I mean, back in the day, it wasn't like American farmers that have wire fences and can just keep them in their yard and they never move. No, these were nomadic people that would came from the steeps and then into Babylon and through Haran into the Levant, to where they aren't really going to think of themselves as having a homestead or a enclosure or anything of the sort. Just moving to better and bigger and brighter things. And the wife may stay put, but the man would be taking the merchandise and the cattle and everything on voyages. And who knows when the husband, the bridegroom, was going to return, maybe early in the morning, and they were supposed to be ready for him. And this is the culture. It's not our culture. It was ancient Middle Eastern culture. So there's a lot, and I find it incredibly interesting. That's what I was going to say about my whole Matrix I came up with a couple months ago. How there seems to be this continuing story of the one who is right not being chosen, and the one who's not being right, and just for the sake of grace and everything, whatever they're trying to prove, a mother loses her child, and nonetheless, it still goes on. The other child saved, and when I pair that with other verses like 2 Samuel 13 and what happened to Tamar through her brother Ammon, and how she had to live a widow, and how it says in Timothy, women shall be saved through their childbirth, and how Eve said, I have borne a man, and all these women and how they react to being barren and things like that. It becomes incredibly clear to me that this was the ancient Semitic idea for a woman to be able to have children, that they thought this made her happy. or something, and was her fulfilling her life. You know, but this had more to do with their own fragility, to where they were worried about their material existence, to be blessed meant to be numerous. And that's enumerating your blessings isn't how you figure out you're blessed. It's through realizing that we're sometimes called to do things that are difficult and to carry our cross, and it may not be as it seems. We're to be walking by faith and to trust God, and it's not as materialistic as they want to say. It's about spirit and not about flesh. And here the people were, their gods of their own belly, and they were just trying to um, remunerate their positions and their status, and things like that. And this is how it became such a mystery to them. And I said all that simply to say I came about, even though I was raised Catholic, and this might have had something to do with it. I came up with a really backward Mary veneration, where I didn't plan to see Mary in this, but how she gave up her son, how it wasn't necessarily what seemed like the best way, but God's wisdom, like Solomon when he cut the babies in half. One mother loses her child, and all the world could be gained. Another mother can be saved. And how eye for an eye isn't the way to go. That instead of all Israel being fallen by the wayside, let some be saved, a remnant. Just the southern kingdom, let the nation be cut in half, and only you know so I came to this conclusion about Mary in a very backward way. And similarly about the first communion, I was been trying to tell you about how it says the Canaanians will become like bread to us, and how the bread from heaven, and how Jesus himself becomes the bread, but to consume him, because he's offered up, his life as a friend, he gives it up for you. And how this is against the Sabbath, and how it's against the laws of no consumption of blood, and sacrificing of a person, and all these things. That it's not like this. It looks, it's something different, and it's not what they would expect. And I stumbled upon naturally the first communion, the last supper, and for that, the last communion, the first communion, the last supper, where did that come from? Apparently it was something Paul heard, and he told in his Corinthian letter. And now from there it went to being essential part of all four of the gospels. And yet it matches all these parts about what Jesus is saying in gospel, about how he, in John's gospel, about how he's given up his body. It just becomes so real and so true that the communion, and Mary giving up her son as co-redemptrix, and these Catholic doctrines having not only Old Testament precedents, but lots of New Testament precedents, and what have you, like in terms of how they act. But um, I didn't say all these things about women losing their children through the sacrifice of God / Satan's plan, um, nor anything about communion to prove Catholic apologetics or anything of the sort. I only recently, like yesterday, came up with that, like that. How wow, that reminds me so much of Mary and the first communion, when I'd already been working on those theories for a while about Jesus' body being given up for people, and how that's missed, and how it's people get it backwards, and they're thinking, that, oh, they were supposed to kill him. He's the Lamb of God, so the priest is supposed to kill him, and that's That's good. Yes, there's good in it, but not the way you think, because there's so much bad. And that's why he's turning to them and he's saying to them, as I was, so he said, turn to them and weep for yourselves, but for your children, for behold, the days are coming in which they shall say, blessed are the barren, and the wombs that are never bare, and the pastures never get sucked. And they will say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in a dry? What shall be done in a dry? So here they are, the Savior of the world, the Mashiach is with them, and he's healing and he's giving. It's not really so much what he says, it's more so what he does. And the most influential thing he does is his final work, the work of giving his body as a sacrifice. But it's not like you think. It's not like so good. It's like it's really pointing out how bad the law was to put an innocent person to death. And this should convict us that we're all sinners and die to what we were, to likewise carry our cross, to realize we're not good if he wasn't saved, and to die to the law. And that's the only way we can marry another, is if the former is dead. It says sort of in Romans 7, but Paul, I think, had to mince words there, so he never outright said it, but you could see where he was going. But let me just do the last little mic drop with the Alexander Jannaeus. I said all that to just point out, you know, I mean, this is crazy. You really should read all this. He's he's got these pagan armies that he's defending Cleopatra with the Greek phalanx and everything. And then he says the Nabatean king Obadiah uh, launched an attack against Alexander because he would supposedly cut off his trade route, which doesn't really make any sense. Some other scholar came up with it. Let's see, who does it? The guy who said that he broke off the Nabatean trade route is named Peter Schaefer. I don't know which nation that guy's from. Schaefer. I wouldn't think that. I think Nabateans were pretty much largely similar and got along pretty well with them most of the time. I mean, they were under the same empire under King Herod, but there was a civil war. So Alexander Jannaeus, his wife being the sister of one of the first notable Pharisees in revisionist history. So Judean insurgents joined forces with Demetrius III Eucharius to fight against Jannaeus. These are really unfortunate names for Hebrew. And if you look at his coin, it's not that calligraphy square Aramaic. That comes through the large influence of the Pharisees over a large period of time. But this is the beginning of the Pharisees. These people were all Sadducees. Sadducees. The Maccabees and all them were Sadducees. There weren't a large number of Pharisees until Salome, the wife of this guy, Alexander Jannaeus. So Alexander, and yes, the Pharisees were much allied with the Herodians. They're both from the east. So Alexander had gathered 6,200 mercenaries to fight 40,000. Oh, and he had 20,000 um, Judeans. So the Seleucid forces defeated Jannaeus at Shechem, but that Shechem was Samaritan. Oh, but Jannaeus, he conquered the Samaritans and put all those heathens to the sword. Yeah, good for him. The defeat forced Alexander to take refuge in the mountains. And so this is the high priest, the king, the ruler of the Judeans. In sympathy towards Jannaeus, 6,000 Judean rebels ultimately returned to him. In fear of this news, Demetrius withdrew. Doubt it. Near who? Oh, Josephus. Okay, I could believe it. Nevertheless, war between Jannaeus and the rebels who turned to conquer him. They fought until Alexander achieved victory. Most of the rebels died in battle, while the remaining rebels fled to the city of Bethoma until they were defeated. Jannaeus had brought the surviving rebels back to Jerusalem, where he had 800 Judeans, primarily Pharisees, crucified. Let me read that again. Jannaeus had brought the surviving rebels back to Jerusalem, where he had 800 Judeans, primarily Pharisees, crucified. Before their deaths, so he had made a problem with the Pharisees because he didn't do the wudu, the ritual ablution, where they washed themselves well enough. He had spilt it on his foot or something, and they had a way of conserving water as well as being clean, that they had strict rules for how that was supposed to be done, and I thought he was being like a heathen the way they didn't listen to the Babylonian experts on how Jerusalem priests were supposed to act. And so before their deaths, Alexander had the rebels' wives and children executed, and these people, similar people, had their own wives and children executed before their own eyes right before this, because they were so afraid of how ruthless Kohen Gadol, the Yanni, Alexander Alexandrus. So Alexandrus later returned the land he had seized in Moab. So he gave Moab back to Moab and gave the Nabateans back to the Nabateans. Suppose he was just talking to the king of Nabatea, but he owned Nabatea. They're talking about both sides of their mouth with all this. But nonetheless, so I'm beat. I envisioned, like, by the time I got to Alexander Jannaeus, I'd have so much energy to just express how much we miss Isaiah 53. It said, they were cut off for our iniquity. Well, one of the most iniquitous, or if that's even a word, was Alexandrus Jannaeus, and Jannaeus or whatever. But nonetheless, he had 800, not three. He had 800 Pharisees who were zealous for the law, executed, put to death, crucified on a cross. This isn't Roman. This is the Jewish high priest. Had 800 Pharisees crucified because they were his political opponents. Well, it seemed like a lot of the Judeans had a problem with Jesus because they were political opponents. They were saying one thing about the Sabbath, and he was saying another thing. And it's sad. But we hid, as it were, our faces from him. Well, the whole Bible is about Jesus. Yeah, I think it is in a way. But in a way, it's about how, like they were always saying, that man was made in God's image. There's a certain universalism in the Bible hidden, if you can see it. And God dwelt amongst humans and he loved them. So just because they're not Jesus just because they're Pharisees, we hid, as it were, our faces from him. There was probably some guy at some time, 100 years before Jesus, who was crucified by the high priest group innocently for following the law, much the same way Jesus was in Isaiah 53. So this was already known to the people of the time. We hid our faces from it, but they knew about it, that 800 Judeans were crucified by the high priest in about 90 BC, 83 BC, and nobody cares because they weren't Jesus. So we lack this love for people. If they're not God, they don't count. We don't love our brothers ourselves, you know. We honor God at the expense of honoring man, loving one another, to have charity, to have grace and kindness for each other, the way we think God has grace for us. We are not the end. And because we're not the end, just thanking God for, everything he's done isn't the only end. There is looking for the changes that God has made, looking at the evil that people have done, and hoping for a better outcome, the hope of the blessed resurrection. All right, that's it. I'm out of here. Peace.